As the maintenance manager of a busy bowling alley, I had a unique set of responsibilities that often kept me at work late into the night. My job was to ensure that all the machines were functioning properly, from the pin setters to the ball return mechanisms. It was a role that required meticulous attention to detail and a good deal of mechanical knowledge. Most nights, after the last bowlers had left and the alley had fallen silent, I would start my rounds. The machine room, located at the back of the building, was the heart of the bowling alley's operations. It was a large, dimly lit space filled with the whirring and clanking of machinery, a stark contrast to the lively atmosphere of the lanes. The routine was always the same. I would walk the length of the room, checking each machine one by one. The faint hum of the overhead lights and the occasional creak of metal were the only sounds that accompanied me. The isolation was something I had grown accustomed to, though it always carried a slight sense of unease. There was something about the dim light and the mechanical symphony that made the room feel almost otherworldly. The quietness of the machine room at night was both a blessing and a curse. On one hand, it allowed me to focus on my work without distractions. On the other hand, the silence had a way of amplifying every small noise, every unexpected sound, turning them into potential signs of malfunction or something else. Despite the eerie atmosphere, I took pride in my work. The smooth operation of the bowling alley depended on these nightly inspections, and I was determined to keep everything running perfectly. Little did I know, one night would bring an encounter that would forever change the way I viewed the machine room and the late hours I spent there. One particularly late night, I was making my usual rounds in the machine room. The alley was completely empty, and the only sounds were the soft hum of the overhead lights and the rhythmic clanking of the pin setters. The familiar mechanical symphony was oddly comforting, a routine that had become second nature to me. As I was checking one of the machines near the back of the room, I suddenly heard an unfamiliar noise. It was a low, muffled sound, like metal scraping against metal, followed by a faint, irregular tapping. I paused, straining to hear over the ambient noise of the room. The strange sounds continued, seeming to come from deeper within the maze of machinery. A shiver ran down my spine. This wasn't the usual creak or groan of the old equipment. It was something different, something out of place. I hesitated for a moment, my instincts telling me to ignore it and carry on with my work. But curiosity and a sense of duty won out. I had to ensure everything was functioning correctly, and I couldn't ignore potential issues. Grabbing my flashlight, I started to make my way towards the source of the noise. The beam of light cut through the dimness, casting long shadows that danced eerily on the walls. The further I walked, the more intense the sounds became. The scraping grew louder, more grating, and the tapping became more pronounced, echoing off the metal surfaces around me. The atmosphere grew heavier with each step, the air thick with a sense of unease. The familiar hum of the machines now felt oppressive, and the isolation that I usually found comforting turned into a source of dread. My heart began to pound in my chest, each beat loud in the stillness of the room. As I approached the far corner of the machine room, the noises suddenly stopped. The silence was deafening, amplifying my growing anxiety. I shone my flashlight around, trying to pierce the shadows and uncover the source of the disturbance. The room seemed to close in on me, the walls pressing in as my sense of unease grew. Just as I was about to turn back, thinking I had imagined it all, the noises started again, louder and more insistent this time. It was clear they were coming from one of the machines just ahead. Summoning all my courage, I moved forward, determined to find out what was causing the disturbance in the quiet, isolated machine room. As I approached the source of the strange noises, my flashlight's beam landed on a figure standing next to one of the machines. At first, I thought it was a colleague who had somehow entered the room without me noticing. The man was bent over, fiddling with something on the side of the machine, his movements deliberate but oddly slow. "Hey, what are you doing here?" I called out, my voice echoing slightly in the large room. The man didn't respond. He continued to tinker with the machine, his back to me. A sense of unease washed over me, stronger than before. I took a step closer, my flashlight shaking slightly in my hand. The closer I got, the more I noticed the peculiarities. The way his shoulders were hunched, the unnatural stillness of his posture between movements. "Hello?" I tried again, louder this time. "You're not supposed to be here." Slowly, the man began to turn around. The movement was almost mechanical, and as he faced me, the beam of my flashlight illuminated his face. My breath caught in my throat. His face was a horrifying sight, covered in deep cuts and smeared with blood. The wounds looked fresh, the blood glistening in the dim light. His eyes, glassy and vacant, locked onto mine, and for a moment, we just stared at each other. A primal terror surged through me, freezing me in place. The man's appearance was ghastly, his expression one of both pain and anger, as if he were trapped in a perpetual state of suffering. Panic took over. I turned and bolted for the door, my heart racing. I didn't stop to look back, fear propelling me forward. The sound of my footsteps echoed loudly in the stillness, mingling with the lingering, irregular noises from the machine room. I burst out into the hallway, my breaths coming in ragged gasps. I ran to find help, my mind racing as I tried to process what I had just seen. The logical part of my brain struggled to make sense of it, but the fear was too overwhelming. I needed to get someone else to confirm what I had witnessed, to make sure I wasn't losing my mind. I found a colleague in the break room. I dragged my colleague back to the machine room, my mind racing with fear and confusion. When we arrived, the room was eerily silent, the strange noises having ceased entirely. I shone my flashlight around, my hands still trembling, but there was no sign of the man I had seen moments before. He was right here, I insisted, my voice shaking, standing next to this machine. My colleague, a seasoned technician named Tom, gave me a concerned look but began to help me search the room. We scoured every corner, checking behind the machines and under tables, but found nothing. There was no trace of the man, no blood, no evidence that anyone had been there at all. The only sound was the familiar hum of the machinery, which now felt more oppressive than ever. The room's dim lighting cast long shadows, making the space feel even more foreboding. Every flicker of light and every creak of metal sent a fresh wave of unease through me. Tom turned to me, his brow furrowed. "Are you sure you saw someone? Maybe it was just a trick of the light or the shadows playing tricks on you." I shook my head vigorously. "I know what I saw, Tom. There was a man here, and he was covered in blood. He looked right at me." Despite my insistence, there was nothing to prove my story. The man had vanished without a trace, leaving only the lingering fear and the haunting image of his mutilated face burned into my memory. The reality of the situation began to sink in, and a deep sense of dread settled over me. Tom tried to reassure me, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. We finished our search in uneasy silence, the atmosphere thick with tension and unanswered questions. The room felt colder, and the shadows seemed to stretch longer, as if the very walls were closing in on us. As we left the machine room, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The fear and confusion from the encounter gnawed at me, making it hard to concentrate on anything else. The man's disappearance was a mystery that I couldn't explain, and it left me with a deep sense of unease that would haunt me for a long time. The next day, still shaken by the previous night's events, I shared my experience with some of my colleagues. Most listened with skeptical expressions, but one former employee, an older man named George, looked at me with a knowing glint in his eye. During our break, George pulled me aside. "I've heard about what you saw last night," he began, his voice low and serious. "There's something you should know about that machine room." He went on to tell me a story that sent chills down my spine. Years ago, a worker had suffered a horrific accident in that very room. It was a stormy night, much like the one I had experienced, and the man had been working late, performing routine maintenance on the machines. Something went wrong, and he got caught in one of the pin setters. By the time anyone found him, it was too late. The injuries were catastrophic, and he died right there in the machine room. George paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Ever since that night, there have been reports of strange occurrences in the machine room. People have seen his spirit, described him just like you did, covered in blood, with deep cuts on his face. They say he's still trying to fix the machines, forever trapped in that moment. The revelation was both horrifying and oddly validating. I wasn't the only one who had seen the spectral figure. Others had experienced the same terror. The idea that the spirit of the deceased worker haunted the place explained the strange noises and the man's sudden disappearance. Reflecting on the incident, I made a firm decision. I would never stay alone in the machine room again. The fear and unease from that night had left an indelible mark on me. The machine room, once just another part of my job, had become a place of dread. Even during the day, the memory of the encounter haunted me, making every sound and shadow seem more sinister. The lingering fear was something I couldn't shake. Each time I entered the machine room, I felt a cold chill, a reminder of the presence that still lurked there. The experience had changed me, instilling a deep-seated wariness and respect for the unseen forces that sometimes make themselves known in the most unexpected places.